Thank you, Professor Aziz Ahmad. Now, the presentations are open for discussion. Those who want to raise some questions, please show your hands. Last one. It should be brief, concise. It should not take more time. You take. First you name the speaker and then ask the question.
Hello. This is to Comrade Aziz Ahmad. The last para, the extreme capitalism has registered impressive victories in large parts of the globe without any major counter-offensive from the working class. Is it true? Because if resistance has taken place in the entire world against this neoliberal policies. First page, last para.
This question is for Comrade Aziz Ahmad. There was a picture of, we have a lumpen proletariat or the proletariat in the informal sector, which is challenge being how to attract them towards the left rather than giving them away to fascist forces. So is this, over the last 10 years or 10-15 years in general, has the growth of communal forces been in correlation with the growth of the lumpen proletariat, or the lumpen proletariat going away from communal forces to some other kind of identity politics? Is this something you can care to comment about?
Any more? Now I want to ask the people down below to ask one question. అక్కడ వాలంటీర్ ఎవరన్నా ఉంటే ఒక ప్రశ్న ఒకరికి ఇవ్వండి మైక్. Before that, somebody can ask.
We march. Usually we use the word fortunate and unfortunate. Avoid this. Can't avoid. Fortunately, I am a Marxist. You can say, I am happy that I am a Marxist. It is unfortunate Manmohan Singh is there. We can, so on and so forth, we can have the alternate. We have to avoid for.
Okay.
My request.
You can give that suggestion. Anybody? Narasimha Rao.
This goes to Comrade Prabhat. You said lumpenization of working class will have implications for democracy and other things. Do you think it's got any implication or any consequence for the organization of the Communist Party? I'm asking you this question in relation to the debates that are going on about the nature of democratic centrism and all.
Only one more will be allowed. Anybody? Oh, go on. Kamesh, go on.
My question is
Huh?
For Aizaz Ahmad,
Oh.
Professor Aizaz Ahmad, and during the revolution in China also, Mao, Mao Zedong has asked the people to know about
మైక్ దగ్గరగా పట్టుకోండి, మైక్ దగ్గరగా పట్టుకోండి. రమేష్ బాబు మళ్ళీ మాట్లాడండి, మైక్ దగ్గరగా పట్టుకుని వినపడేట్టు మాట్లాడండి.
my question is to Comrade Aizaz Ahmad, and during the revolution in China also, Mao Zedong has asked the people to know about the nation first.
Okay.
While going for the revolution.
Ramesh Babu, you should write the question and send it.
Now, the nationalism in the present scenario, it is being taken as a property of the communalists and other capitalist sectors.
Ramesh Babu,
Why not?
Ramesh Babu, you stop the question because mic is not working.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, that's what I am asking. Hello, is it working? Okay. And now we'll stop the. There are a lot of questions have already. Ramesh Babu, you sit down. A lot of questions has already come, and the speakers will answer these questions. First, I will request Comrade Prabhat to answer because a lot of questions came to him, and will give the.
Thank you very much, Comrade. There are lots of questions. It wouldn't be possible for me to look at each one of those questions. So I have just made some notes of what are the main issues raised in those questions, and I'll go through them. The first question is, or the first point about one of the questions which strikes me is the suggestion that the entire set of unorganized workers consists of lumpen proletariat. I have no desire to say that, not at all. What I'm trying to say is that to the extent there is a rise in the size of the so-called unorganized informal sector, correspondingly there is a rise in the size of what I would call the lumpen proletariat, because segments of the informal sector workers are segments that can be categorized as a lumpen proletariat. The second point which was also raised is, I do not mean to say that the lumpen proletariat is bigger than the proletariat. And then there are questions raised about what is the proletariat, are government employees in proletariat and so on. I must begin by quoting a well-known British statistician, Arthur Bowley, who actually once said that all significant facts of social life are amenable not to measurement, are not amenable to measurement, but can be directly observed. Now, I think what is happening about the proletariat versus the lumpen proletariat, I was simply talking about an increase in the relative weight, the relative social, political weight of the lumpen proletariat compared to the proletariat. That's not the same as saying numbers. Likewise, concepts of class, they're not empirical concepts. It's true that you can make empirical approximations to them, but let's not act, and in making those approximations, you can have all kinds of conventions. In fact, Lenin himself tried to calculate at one point what is the size of the bourgeoisie. But those are conventions you have to adopt in order to approximate conceptual entities. So proletariat, lumpen proletariat, etc. are really conceptual entities, and I was making a general point which I believe can be directly observed, quite independent of actually categorizing who belongs to what. We have a general idea of what the lumpen proletariat is from Marx's writings. I'm not a Marx scholar like Ajas, but two places where I think Marx discusses this is first, of course, the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels, and secondly in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Now, I was trying to make the point that, of course, again, it's not that the lumpen proletariat is inherently fascist. What I was trying to say, in fact, Marx himself says his discussion of the lumpen proletariat in the Communist Manifesto, where he actually talks about it as a class that may take radical positions on certain occasions, contrasted with the actual concrete conditions of the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, when it is actually used by Louis Bonaparte to introduce a Bonapartist state. So Marx himself is talking at one level of the various possibilities open, and at another level of how a particular possibility gets realized. And what I'm trying to say is that given the tendency towards fascism that exists in neoliberal conditions, to which Ejaz was also referring, the existence of such a large-sized lumpen proletariat is something which can play an extremely dangerous role, because this class, this segment consisting of what Marx called the social scum, is something which is capable of being utilized in ways which are inimical to the interests of the working class and to the left. Now, this is not even a particularly striking point, but it's an extension of a point which we all know. We all know that conditions of unemployment generally are conducive to the emergence of fascism. They're also conducive in ways to the emergence of the left. As a matter of fact, in Germany, the impact of the Great Depression in terms of large unemployment was not only the emergence of the fascist party, but also a significant increase in the membership of the German Communist Party. And so much so that many of the fascist followers were considered, underdone steak, namely that they were red inside, that many of them were implicitly, in fact, sympathizers, sympathetic to communists, which is why there was a radical element in fascism. That radical element represented by SA and Rome and so on really was that. It was thinking in terms of an it was anti-capitalist in its rhetoric, but of course German fascism, when victorious, kills off that radical element, literally kills off in the night of long knives, and becomes an instrument of the finance capital, with which it was aligned even earlier. The leadership was, they get money from all kinds of monopoly capitalists. Now, it's in that connection that I was talking about the emerging situation. Now, am I being pessimistic? Somebody accuses me of being pessimistic. Now, what I'd like to suggest is that, it's important to keep our eyes open. I believe that the left in India is extremely important, exactly for the reasons that Ejaz talked about. That I believe that the left is the only authentic legatee of the anti-colonial struggle and India's long revolution. I believe there are substantial segments in this society which actually back this counter-revolution against the tradition of the anti-colonial struggle, the progressive tradition of the anti-colonial struggle, and these segments see the left as a hindrance. I'll come to this point a bit later as well. They see the left as a hindrance. I believe the importance of the left lies not only in terms of how many seats it gets in parliament, how many governments it has, but it lies in the fact that it is an enormous bulwark against the move towards counter-revolution. And that is why it's very important for me that we must not think that we are so kind of marginalized anyway that nobody would, that there would be no need to take recourse to fascist methods. On the contrary, what's happening in West Bengal is precisely an attempt to physically suppress the left. And I think what's happening in West Bengal is not a Bengal phenomenon. What's happening in West Bengal is really an attempt to remove the main obstacle in the way of the counter-revolution against the long revolution that the anti-colonial struggle entailed. There was a question about Latin America versus India. Now, I think I shouldn't take too long. Two issues there. And firstly, let's not forget that in Latin America, there was a lost decade. I mean, India has had a fairly rapid growth rate, which, even though it may not have benefited the poor and the unemployed or the underemployed or the labor reserves, has certainly brought benefits to the middle class. As a result, middle class alienation from this neoliberalism in India has not gone as far as in Latin America, where in fact it had gone. But then that may well be changing with the crisis that has emerged at this moment. But at the same time, I think India has another difference, namely the existence of the left as a bulwark against neoliberalism and against the counter-revolution, which I think has been far more powerful in a sense than was the case in Latin America. For that reason, I think that taking recourse to fascist methods is something which is really very much on the cards. I mean, so did Latin America, Chile, Pinochet, and so on. One can discuss that. But fundamentally, there are differences between the two situations which we should be aware of. Is the Indian bourgeoisie changing? Yes, of course it is, because after all, there was an effort at building a national, a capitalist development in relative autonomy from imperialism, non-alignment, public sector, these control over the nation's natural resources. Now, the effort is to undo that because of the fact that the substantial segments of the big bourgeoisie, the corporate financial interests, are now seeing their interest linked to that of globalized finance. They themselves are getting globalized. As a result, the hiatus now is not between a foreign colonial power on the one hand and the Indian people, with the bourgeoisie vacillating, no doubt, but nonetheless not abandoning the anti-colonial struggle. But the hiatus is inside the country between the corporate financial interests, the big bourgeoisie, together with imperialism on the one hand and the people of the country on the other, with the middle class, currently a beneficiary of the boom, really playing a role of supporting the big bourgeoisie, the urban middle class. Then there was a question on gender oppression. Now, I think that's a very important question. I'm not really qualified to say much about it, but I'll just mention one thought that has struck me, and that's the following. That, in countries like Britain, of course, you didn't have a socialist revolution. But even the social democratic, even the revisionist working class played a very important social role. I believe that the existence of democracy, the existence of a number of things which are, as it were, constitute humane values which were introduced into that society, whatever it is, was the contribution, in a sense, of the social weight of the working class. The working class produced its own intellectuals, from Beatrice Webb to Raymond Williams, and that was a very major tendency. Now think of India. I mean, if it is the case that you actually have the weight of the lumpen proletariat quite substantial as opposed to proletariat, the intellectuals by and large all belong to the upper castes. We don't really have that strong a tradition of working class intellectuals emerging. Now in situations like this, therefore, the kind of introduction of a sense of community, informed by a set of values of egalitarianism is something which is much weaker. And I think this absence of a sense of community, people being thrown together, uprooted from all kinds of different callings, trying to make an existence, eke out an existence, whatever by fair means or foul, is something that actually gives rise to a collapse of values. And I think certainly underlying a lot of the gender oppression now is a total collapse of values. Of course, patriarchy and so on are very important, but certainly the lumpenization of society adds to that. I agree that is not confined, this Mamata Banerjee phenomenon or Trinamool Congress, having a political party recruited from the lumpen proletariat largely, is not confined to Bengal. It is there earlier. Shiv Sena was referred to by Ejaz, and of course large numbers of Hindu communal forces. Let's not forget that Shiv Sena began essentially as a group of stormtroopers against the communist trade unions in Bombay. That was the origin of Shiv Sena. In fact, Vijay Tendulkar wrote a play called Ghasiram Kotwal in order to actually emphasize that aspect of Shiv Sena. Is the working class indifferent to the emergence of lumpen proletariat or emergence of all this informal sector? Not at all. On the contrary, I think one of the remarkable achievements has been the degree to which the CITU has actually tried to organize the informal sector workers. I mean, I know that Anganwadi workers have been organized. There was a very impressive rally in Delhi just a few months ago. I mean, in fact, a very substantial chunk of national CITU membership now comes from informal sector workers. Now, those are very important contributions. So let's not say that the working class has been indifferent to it. What does this primitive accumulation of capital achieve? Well, primitive accumulation of capital refers to a method. Fundamentally, you are using force or coercion in some ways in order to dispossess petty producers and to take over their assets. So if you have a situation where land is taken from the peasantry and used for building these real estate projects, then that's a form of primitive accumulation of capital. So it's not as if its destination is something different, but it's visible before our eyes what this destination is. It's a method that we are talking about, as opposed to the normal accumulation that comes out of the surplus value of the workers. Okay, industrial workforce. Yeah, how do we overcome this inability to absorb labor reserves? I think it requires an alternative trajectory. I personally believe that the only way that this can be overcome is through a socialist trajectory. I believe that capitalism in the current era is incapable of actually absorbing the labor reserves, which is why I was saying that there were remarkable supporting factors in the early years of capitalism which are not available today. But of course, the point is that when we say socialist trajectory, if we just say socialist trajectory, the matter ends. What I'm trying to show is analytically the link between neoliberal development and this. Therefore, let us overcome the neoliberal trajectory, and we know, as Lenin said in discussing monopoly capitalism, that some people may say, let's go back to competitive capitalism. That's nonsensical. From monopoly capitalism, we can only move towards socialism. Likewise, overcoming neoliberal trajectory, the only way forward is towards socialism. Finally, there is the question of, I think there was a question. Okay. That why am I saying all this? I mean, I'm not just saying all this to us. I'm not just saying all this to the left audience, but I believe there is a very significant middle class opinion in this country which believes that the left is irrelevant as far as the struggle for democracy is concerned, as far as secular struggle is concerned, that the middle class is enough to carry this struggle forward. We don't need the leftists. What I'm trying to say is that that is a completely erroneous understanding. In fact, the only political force that is capable of carrying forward this struggle is the left, and the sooner the middle class realizes it, the better. Thank you.
Now I invite Professor Amir Bagchi to respond to the questions.
There was some question about my